Hi, this is Zach Semke with Passive House Accelerator, and thanks for tuning in to this special bonus episode of the Passive House podcast, recorded at Passive House Network's 2023 conference in Denver, Colorado. And a big thank you to EnerSign for the support of the series. The interview you're about to hear was hosted by Carmel Pratt, co-host of the Next Gen edition of Passive House Accelerator Live.
Monte Paulsen. I am a managing member of a news group called Climate Ready Buildings Group. And it's a very small practice, but we're focused on ultimately how to advise building owners and construction teams on how to prepare buildings differently for the coming climate. And initially, we're doing quite a bit of research on kind of exactly how buildings are failing. And we're helping some governments, province of British Columbia, City of Vancouver, maybe North Vancouver, understand what they need to legislate to require, say, apartment buildings, for example, to retrofit so that people don't die in those buildings during heat waves. And we'll also be doing some retrofit guidance. We won't be implementing them, but in terms of advising building owners on things they want to do. And we're doing one or two select Passive House projects. Our first project is kind of different. We're working with a remote First Nations group in British Columbia. This is a place you can't drive to. There's only one ferry a week. It's really remote. But they have a lot of timber, and they have a tradition of wood construction. And we're going to prepare a kit where they can build their own Passive House using their own lumber and their own hands. So it would be like a sea can that would come from Vancouver with the windows and HRV and membranes and all those pieces. And a big instruction book, kind of like if you got a Lego kit. And then they'll have a list of wood they need to cut to certain dimensions and certain sizes and dry and grade. So they're using their own lumber, and we'll be providing training for the first few houses. But then we're not. We're going to train them to train each other. And the idea is that each kit would come with sort of the pile of wood parts, a pile of everything else, the instructions, and somebody who built a couple. And initially, they have a need for about 50 or 70 houses on their own territory. But after that, they want to see if they can export this other places. And they're going to only sell initially to the First Nations.
Amazing.
But at some point, they might sell to settlers as well. But it would be a little different than some of the other Passive House kits, which are all prefab and all made in the factory, and they're great, and it's a great technology, and it builds very fast.
But it's hard to ferry across to remote areas.
Well, no, you can actually ferry fine. We've done from the thinking of this is there's some people for whom they're just never going to be able to afford it, and they just need to build a simple, basic house. The kit price, like if you're bringing your own lumber locally, you have a much lower embodied carbon. You can buy things as you can buy them. You can make some compromises, on how you clad it and how you finish the inside, things like that. Yeah, we're trying to keep the box of things that are not wood down to like $200,000, $250,000. And so if you lived in a rural space and wanted to put in your own labor and just wanted to buy a kit, you could potentially buy this, and then maybe for another $50,000 in wood, you could build your own house, your own Passive House. And there's a lot of equity issues as we go forward, but there's an awful lot of people who have skills and time and labor, but don't have $1 million to put up a kit house.
Yeah.
So we're trying to find something where people can bring their own labor and their local supplies. We're really curious so it makes a lot of sense in a rainforest on the coast of British Columbia where there are giant trees. So this would be a very wood house. It would be wood exterior, wood interior, wood cladding, like obsessively wood, because there's a lot of wood there.
Yeah.
I was just in Santa Fe visiting Andrew Mitchell where, they build out of Adobe, and I come past it. Could you take the same approach where you get this kit of parts, but you're going to make all your Adobe bricks? You're going to just make them.
Yep.
Stack your house together, but you've got this box of parts
where
everything, you didn't have to keep going out to the store, you didn't have to decide which is the best window and all that stuff. Here it is.
Insert locally produced product here.
Yeah. Something like that. Because in addition to having housing problems and climate problems, we have real equity problems. And while I'm all for what all these businesses are doing, they're fantastic, this is a service industry for rich people at this point.
Yeah, 100%.
That's what it is. If you're going to build a custom house, buy a single-family house. That's what it is. And that's our other focus is we're doing a lot of work around multifamily.
Yeah, I was just going to ask.
Just produced the first draft. It's not public yet. It'll be out probably in early next year, for Passive House Network, which is how to plan a multifamily passive house building. And it's a guide really aimed at architects and teams who've done multifamily before, but not multifamily passive house. Mm-hmm. So they're not newbies.
Yeah.
This is very different than the
It's how to step up.
Yeah. And it's just going through, helping them understand how they need to take their existing process and insert passive house. So as you probably know, most architectural programs run through this very rigid step of schematic design development, construction documents, bidding, all through this. And those are laid out very clearly in AIA guidelines, and they're very similar in Canada, US, and elsewhere. This guide is going to just go step by step to you. Okay, here's your process.
Where do you insert certain key?
And you've already got a Gantt chart that lays out, your planning times and everything else, and we're kind of saying these are additional milestones you want to put in that chart, and then we explain them really carefully.
Amazing.
So the idea is, and a bunch of work that Bronwyn has done and Lois has done, when they looked at the cost premiums of multifamily passive house, they found this really wide range from like nothing more to 10%, and we had outliers at like 20%. We also have buildings that are like 0 or 10% less.
Yeah.
And so the second question every developer asks is, how do I do one for 0, not for 20% more? And it all comes down to experience. And what we've seen is the more you work on it, it gets better.
Yeah, and can actually get into the...
So the goal of this guide, of this planning guide, is to help teams in areas that aren't New York and Vancouver and don't have a whole bunch of people you can hire who've already done it.
But have the experience already
to
there.
get the experience and leg up and a walkthrough.
To kind of start at 0 at least.
Yeah.
Passive House is the global leader and benchmark for operational carbon. Should it also be for embodied carbon?
It's come up. The embodied carbon question has come up at the International Passive House conferences for at least 10 or I've been going for 12, 13 years. It's been coming up that whole time. There's always somebody who's pushing.
Yeah.
Historically, and through the years that Wolfgang Feist was really the boss of this place, and he's pretty much phased out now. He's semi-retired. And he's still someone we all know and love very much, but Jessica is kind of really the boss. She won't tell you that. She's in denial about the fact that she's the boss, but she is. So you should ask her what she says about it. My observation from the outside, and Jessica would know more, was that during the many years Feist was really leading passive house, he was fairly attached to the focus that it be simple and limited. It's a very simple standard. It's just a few numbers, and you can get there any way you want, but it's and that those numbers be based on the physics and the science the best they have. And so even over the years, as some science changed a little bit, the standard evolved and moved around it a little bit. But it was slow to move because they really liked the simplicity. Yeah. And the simplicity really pays off when you're working in 60 countries. Because as soon as it gets complicated, it also gets cultural.
Yeah.
So there was a resistance against embodied carbon and electrification and a lot of things that were really good ideas. Not because they weren't good ideas. And they're all like, yes, do that. Absolutely. They just weren't sure it should be part of this standard. Yeah. And I think it would be difficult right now, with what we know now, to write an embodied carbon standard for Passive House or anybody else. When I look at embodied carbon modeling and practicing, it reminds me of the early days of Passive House, 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Most people aren't modeling it right.
And the data that we have available is questionable.
Yeah. The true carbon content of the material really it depends on a lot of things. We'll talk about wood just for a minute as an example, but let me finish this first thought. So, if I were asked to write, the best standard you could write, and that's not my core expertise, although there's a group in Seattle who it really is, and there's kind of embodied carbon leaders and groups around North America, so there are a lot of people who put a lot of thought to this, but every time I go to their meetings and listen to them, there's still a lot of stuff they're working out.
Yeah.
And the standard would be so different for a remote Pacific Northwest place where you've got a crap load of your own wood.
Right.
A lot of your own wood. Than if you're building in like a desert, So
Yeah, the simplified
have to
approach that
understand,
works
yeah.
in 60 countries goes out the window when
So
you're.
is Pass-Faust the right way to do it? I don't know. You could certainly, I think, set some high-level numbers, in the LEDI guides out of the UK, those? One of them, Economic Transformation Initiative. I probably got that wrong. They have set some targets for the UK that make a lot of sense. But it's funny, like they have this graph, I actually use it in the presentation, where you have like where it's at, where they want it to be like 2030-ish, where they want it to be like 2050. Because they build primarily with like cinder block and double white construction, cinder block and bricks, these fairly carbon intensive supplies. For our wood frame 6-story apartment buildings, we're already at their mid-target before we've done anything, because it's a wood frame building. So we need to be looking at a much lower target.
Right.
And then would we be rewarded by some international points system just because we're using our local supplies?
Right.
And then even for wood as example, people would say, build with wood, mass wood is great. But mass timber, if done wrong every step of the way, could have higher embodied carbon than concrete done right every step of the way.
100%. Yeah,
so
forestry management is a whole other issue on itself.
Management, how you put the wood together, there's just so many pieces to it. So you can't even say absolutely that a 2x4 is better than a steel beam that is better than a concrete.
Right.
And then concrete's changing so much too.
Yeah.
So I do think where putting something in the standard would help is it would give opportunity to accelerate, using that phrase, companies that are trying to come up with like concrete alternatives. So in British Columbia, there's a few companies who are doing a whole bunch of work with kelp. And you can press kelp into things that are an awful lot like CMU blocks. Right now, they're just making like garden pavers and things that are not structural.
Right.
But the goal is to get that as a replacement for concrete. And I think there's probably other technologies around the world I don't know about.
Blocks and
So if you had standards that required something and it gave more reason for people to be trying those different products, I don't know what's the right and wrong one. And I would want to do a lot of testing before I suggested a big building uses it.
Right.
But that, what's been great about Passive House, at least in Vancouver and in my part of the world, is when we started, we had to buy windows and HRVs and membranes from Europe. Now all that stuff's made locally. And you might, on a luxury project, still decide to buy something Europe because you really like that window or something. But you could build everything with materials made right in the Vancouver region.
Yeah.
And that was almost unthinkable 10 years ago. And it really matters when you get to talking about like affordable projects, either affordable homes, but especially affordable multifamily. If you're buying 200 windows and having to ship them halfway around the world, and you're buying them from a plant, maybe in Slovakia or something, versus buying 200 windows made locally, it's a big difference.
Yeah, especially for ongoing maintenance, for replacements, for, for sure. Okay, this is a bit of a touchy subject, but in the vein of Passive House, do certifications matter, or are the principles more important?
I think every publisher should do at least one certified building, because you don't really know the principles and the standards until you certify.
You apply them.
And I hear people having this debate who've never done one. And I kind of say, well, do one, and then let's have this conversation. Let's talk then, because then we'll have a formed conversation. It's the same with people always wanting to rewrite the standard, and you find out they've never done a certified building. So it's like, it's like saying you're going to redesign a bicycle having never ridden one or seen one. It's a very strange thing that a lot of builders and other folks and architects want to redo everything before they've tried it. So I think the way I would answer this question is really every product, every architecture firm, every builder ought to do one certified Passive House, and then make your decision if you need to keep doing it.
Yeah.
And you'll have the full context to do that in. What I can say, as a person who's been a certifier and done several million square feet of projects, it gets way easier after the third or fourth one. Everything starts to come together. Certification is not a big deal when the architect has done it before, the builder's done it before, the PHPP modeler has done it before, the certifier's done it before. Ideally, they worked together before, so they kind of know each other in the systems.
Right.
And what happens is there's one or two new things on this building, this and the last building. You have a quick phone call, you talk through how you're going to model and grade and rate that, and off you go. And everybody does their job. And,
Right.
And I'll be honest, as I'm moving into a smaller company, I love being at RDH. I was there for many years. It's fantastic. Everybody should work at RDH for 5 years. It's like the grad school. So at RDH, we took in lots of work, and we still do. In my little company, I'm only going to take on certification projects where I know the people, because I don't want to do the hard ones anymore.
You don't want to relearn the process to certify, but I think from our standpoint, the third-party assurance, the verification, right, the actual testing to performance is key, and that's something that you lose when you don't certify, right? It's easy to run the same principles, the same intent, but not have
here's the thing. If you're like a lifelong building science professional and you're building your own house, you probably don't need third-party to check all those things. You can check them. But you would also probably hire people to check a few things you didn't know how to rate yourself.
Yeah.
But most people aren't that. Most people need someone else to vet things and say, yes, this is or is not passed off. Yes, it did or did not meet these criteria. And I think certification can be a really cost-effective way to do it. It's funny, like even the cost of people think it's harder. It just depends on how you do things. So I had somebody contact me, a student in one of my classes who was doing a small small community center, community rooms and locker rooms. And he was asking for ballpark certification costs. And I said, the ballpark's between $10,000 and $100,000. It's just, how smooth are we going to make this process? I will come meet with you and tell you how to get way close to the $10,000, but it means you've got to plan and do your homework and put everything together, and I can point you to who to talk to for each of those steps. And I think when we get more consultants and certifiers and builders who've been there, and we can get the cost of certification, and I'm talking about a larger building, I'm not a single-family house. My son works for a great little construction company that's doing single-family pass tests. They certify for the cost of the fees, $3,000 or $4,000, because everything's easy. They've done it all before. They work with the same certifier again and again and again, and that cost is absorbed into a construction cost that's probably at least $500,000 to build anything there, or like $1 million. So $3,000 to certify a $1 million construction project. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point. As more of that is brought in-house, right, then the outside costs are less, and it's baked into an architect's service, a GC service, and it's just
becomes just how they do things.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that, and I've seen this for years and years, you have construction crews, or we really saw it with the modular factories, we're used to doing things before the past. They were used to those supplies and methods, and they resisted like heck getting the first pass because it was new and you had to think things and you made mistakes, and But then they didn't want to go back.
Yeah.
Once they learned,
we figured this out now. This is the new process.
But also, it's just better. The constructors went, this is a better supply. This is a better window. This is a better membrane. This is a better way to do put things together. I don't want to go back to doing it the other way because I see how this is different. I wanted to do this. And once you get that across companies, across regions, there are a lot of folks like that. The cost premium goes down, the acceptability goes up, and certification just doesn't become that big an issue. So I think it's tremendously important at the beginning, in any region or with any company, with any individual. I think everybody should really make it something to do early on. The tough part is usually the people asking that question are the people who need it most.
Are the people who need to cross the hurdle of certifying, and then decide.
My family has a joke about me. When I'm kind of saying, should I go to the doctor? It's like, yes.
If you're wondering,
And kind of, should I certify? Usually if you're asking the question, the answer is yes. You probably should have gone to the doctor last week.
All right. 100%. I agree. Okay, I had a lot more questions, but I'll leave us with the more broad one, and the one that I try to ask everybody in this field is, what do you think the future of passive house building is?
These are great questions all over the place. I don't know. It's a really good question. So this interesting thing has happened in Vancouver and in British Columbia, where we've been doing it for a long time, and there's a lot of built buildings. Our provincial code has what we call the STEP code, and over a period of years, up to about 2030, by 2032, it's slipping a bit with different politics at different times. Every building will have, at least on the surface, the same metrics as a passive house. Now, what it doesn't have is the certification and some of those more detailed pieces, but every building is going to be built to 15 kilowatt hours per square meter of heating energy, or 4.75 BTUs if you speak American. The difference is the way they model it, not using PHPP, it's not the same as 50 would be in PHP. Yep. It's more like 25-ish, depends on the building. But 25-ish is actually pretty good, especially in a relatively mild climate like much of coastal BC is. And it doesn't have ventilation conditioning, which is a problem. There's key things in passive house that aren't in this code. But it was a big step getting here to this code. And what I think will happen is gradually people will figure out, right, we don't really have ventilation right. And so the ventilation code will come along. It doesn't all come to passive house in one easy lump. Great, now we're passive house. It starts with the big ideas, and everybody fights them, and then they realize, okay, we got to work on ventilation. We have to work on how we count thermal bridges and some other things we're not doing very well. And that second layer of conversation is now starting to happen. So I think, at least in BC, by 2040-ish, that's just a number I'm making up because it's kind of officially starting in 2030, and there's a lot of code fixes that are going to be required, but certainly by mid-century, everything will basically be a passive house. It won't be called a passive house, it will be certified, it won't have the Wolfgang Weiss stamp on it.
It'll just be a building that's built to code.
A building that's built to code, yeah. So I think there's a degree to which passive house, when it's most successful, phases itself out a little bit. Now, that said, we're still at a point where we have apartment buildings and other buildings that I've worked on that are not certified, but they're building to the code in 2030. And they've done a passive house project too, so they're putting in the same ventilation systems because they've got that experience. So they're not quite building a passive house, they're building a code and better and addressing these key issues. I think that's okay. I think that's pretty good. It's also important that our landmark buildings do serve. So we have a 60-story tower that's a really high design building by an international architect, Tom Wright. Great, it goes like this as it goes up, right? You might have seen pictures of it. It's important that that's certified because that building's going to be a landmark for 100 years. It's on the highest spot of the city. It's going to be the highest building. Like it's something, like a landmark in any other big city. That one really got certified. We're working on a new art gallery that is currently slated to be both mass timber and passive house by Herzog de Moria, this great famed Swiss architectural group. There's some pushback on passive house. We'll see if it actually certifies or not. I mean, give us a few years. But I think it's important that building, that again, will be a landmark in the city. It's a building that going to be a landmark. I think it's important that that's certified.
Yeah.
Whether we'll see. Ask me again in 2 years. We'll let you know if it is. It's certainly capable of it. We've modeled it. They can do it.
And that piece is talked about in your architectural history course, right? When you learn about that building, you learn about how it performs and why it's,
I think certification plays such a huge role in the growth of individuals who are learning to do it. But then people who have actually certified a few buildings and decide to do, I'm going to do step 4 plus this ventilation for this, because they know what they're talking about. They can sort through that, and it makes sense for them. People who've never built one who want to decide they don't need to do it, it's like, I don't have enough time and crayons to help, And in a region, too, it does kind of work itself out of existence. That's kind of what's happened in Brussels to some degree. It's just become code. They use a software based on an older version of PHP. It was like PHP 6. So, it doesn't even have a bunch of the things we use.
Yeah. But we still call it a passive house code because we use it as a model for places that haven't yet adopted a similar,
We have to grow out of single-family homes as a culture. Single-family homes and the cars they begat, and the stuff they begat, and the strip malls they begat are the biggest driver of climate damage at a massive scale.
And it's ironic because, you know, when they first built Levittown and the first suburb, they were trying, all these people were coming back from the war, they wanted to start families, they were trying to build affordable housing. They weren't thinking, I'm going to fuck up the world by a climate disaster, having everyone drive great distances.
And they were, I mean, in all the wrong ways, but they were trying to have equality built into that, right? Everybody gets the same thing. Not that everybody was able to get that same thing on an equal playing field, but that's a great point.
As we sail into the next 50, 60 years, we're going to see some new things happen. One, the regular climate destruction will eat up much of our current construction. Our infrastructure will eat up much of our construction ability. Like, we have this much construction capacity around the world, some huge chunk of it, it could be as high as half, depending on what happens, is just going to be tied up rebuilding roads and bridges and things that washed out.
Yeah.
So all the rest of the construction now just got way more expensive and difficult unless we ramp up that capacity dramatically, which creates new and carbon questions. Then the second thing is that, you know, a third, maybe half the world's population by 2070, 2080, we're living in places where you can't really go outside and work during the day. So they're going to migrate. We're going to have migration like humans have never done since humans have been this number. And we're a little rounding mark on the mammals list.
Right.
So that migration is going to mean people are leaving behind buildings and going places they need new buildings. And then for those that are successful, and we're already seeing this in Vancouver and you see it in New York and other places, you know, successful upper middle class people from all over the world are moving places that are not as hot, not as flooding. They don't call themselves climate migrants, but it's part of their decision of where to go.
Yeah.
And we have a lot who want to come to BC because it's kind of a good place to spend the next century. So those with money will come and want good multifamily housing and good buildings and passive housing. But there's another huge group, like what's happening in Pakistan, it's happening in the whole Sahel region. We're already living on marginal land, they just can't farm or raise goats there anymore. So you see these photo news of people who have like dismantled their house that was built over 2 or 3 generations, and they're taking the windows and the doors and the little heater and all this stuff and putting that in a truck and migrating somewhere, you know, as best they can. It's part of where this kit idea came from. Like, they're taking the windows with them because that's the expensive part of the house. They can't take the bricks. But I think we're going to have a huge amount of people around the world who effectively have to self-build shelter. And as much as, you know, the idea of giving them a prefab or passive house is a great idea, nobody's got the money for that, you know? Right. So I think we need to also consider how we get more than passive house principles, like of the math, the 15 kilowatt hours or 0.6 ACH. Where can we help people live better, build better in these difficult situations of cities that suddenly need a whole lot more multifamily housing, like doubling every few years, and remote areas where the poverty has been accelerated by climate change. So I certainly don't think all those buildings need to survive passive house, but I think this community knows a lot about the science and can help people make better decisions, although they might never be passive house. So I think there's when you say where's it going in the future, I think we have to kind of, I'm torn. I respect what I always perceived as Feist's approach of keep it simple, keep it basic. Now, it's worth noting they have like 10 standards, so they have sprawled in the last few years, and there's more discussion of things here. You know? So I think they struggle to keep it limited and basic and simple. And my feeling is passive house is one tool for planners and developers. That's a great tool to help you conceive a better building. It's not. We need to talk about how to deal with fires and smoke and rain and floods, and passive house doesn't do any of that. Yeah. So I sort of want to have conversations with those people about all these things that are facing us, and just have passive house assumed. Whatever we're doing is going to be a passive house. But there's all these other issues we need to figure out. They're actually way more expensive and way more difficult. They're easier to address if you just have as a given a baseline for ventilation and a baseline for thermal enclosure and some of these other pieces. Right. If you're trying to discuss all of that at once, should it be a passive house, should it be this, and should it be made out of rammed earth, and should it be in a flood zone, like, it's just too much. Nobody can sort of it. So I think bringing the individuals and the industry to a full understanding of Passive House will facilitate those conversations much better.
So we're moving beyond the conversation of Passive House, and that's the inherent kind of baseline.
And I'd say that there's no disrespect, and I'm not saying people shouldn't certify it. I don't want to be perceived as that, but I think everybody should do one certification, no matter what you're going to do. I also think we need to move past just Passive House certification as being. There's another way to put it. I think a lot of people, policymakers and builders, they perceive Passive House as like the top of the mountain.
Goal, right?
You know, it's like I got there, and it's all this work, and it feels like that as you're going up the hill. I'm sure. I have sympathy for that. After you've done a few, and then you start looking at everything else we need to do for what climate, it's more like the plane as you approach the mountains. And great, we're on this plane, and we're all doing this. Now, what do we got to do together?
Right. Yeah, we just reached the trailhead, and now we got to climb.